Sir, your champagne is ready. Garrett Whitmore III didn't even turn around. Did I ask you to speak? He raised one hand, silencing her like a dog. Then he smirked at his billionaire friends. Since this black girl is so good at carrying plates, maybe she can give me financial advice. His eyes turned cold. I've got $50 million, sweetheart. What should I do, open a savings account at the welfare office? His table roared with laughter. He waved a $100 bill in her face. Here's your tip in advance. Teach a billionaire how money works. A woman in pearls whispered, "These people don't know their place." Felicia Turner stood frozen. Black woman, cheap uniform, surrounded by white billionaires. Alone. No one defended her. But here's what none of them knew. In 15 minutes, this black girl would expose a $50 million fraud on live television. And Garrett Whitmore? He would lose everything. The Meridian Club wasn't just a restaurant. It was a temple of wealth, perched on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, where the elevator required a membership card that cost more than most Americans earn in a year. Every Saturday morning, the same ritual unfolded. Wall Street titans gathered for what they called power brunch. 3 hours of champagne, lobster omelets, and deals that moved markets. The tables were draped in white linen. The silverware was actual silver, and the staff moved like ghosts, trained to be seen only when needed and never heard at all. On the wall, a massive screen displayed CNBC Live, stock tickers scrolling endlessly, a constant reminder that even while these men ate, their money was making more money. This was Garrett Whitmore's kingdom. At 58 years old, Garrett Whitmore III had built Whitmore Capital into a $12 billion hedge fund. Forbes called him a financial genius. CNBC called him a market oracle. He called himself inevitable. But those who'd been destroyed by him had other names. He was famous for hostile takeovers, buying struggling companies, loading them with debt, extracting millions in fees, then letting them collapse. Pension funds raided. Small businesses bankrupted, thousands of jobs evaporated, all legal, all profitable, all utterly without conscience. His catchphrase, repeated so often it became a dark joke on Wall Street: "Money is the only language that matters." Today, Garrett sat at table 7 with 6 associates, 2 fund managers who laughed at every joke, a tech CEO seeking investment, a senator's wife collecting donations, her husband's aide, Bradley, taking notes, and Caroline Hayes, a 42-year-old fund manager who was the only one at the table who ever seemed uncomfortable with Garrett's cruelty. Garrett was talking about his latest obsession, Nexus Technologies. "I'm telling you," he said, gesturing with his champagne glass, "Nexus is the next Amazon. I said it on CNBC last week. Put everything you have into it." What he didn't tell them, what he would never tell them, was the truth. Garrett knew Nexus was rotten. He'd seen the internal reports. The SEC was circling. The company's accounting was fraudulent, its revenues fake, its collapse inevitable. But Garrett didn't care. Because Garrett was running a pump and dump. Every time he went on television and praised Nexus, the stock jumped 3 to 5%. And every time it jumped, Whitmore Capital quietly sold shares, $52 million worth over 8 months. He was cashing out while telling everyone else to buy in. By the time Nexus collapsed, Garrett would be rich. Everyone who trusted him would be ruined. That was the man waving a $100 bill in Felicia Turner's face. And Felicia? To everyone in that restaurant, she was invisible. Just another black woman in a black uniform, carrying plates and refilling water glasses. 28 years old, tired eyes, silent. No one knew her story. No one cared to ask. But Felicia Turner had secrets that would have shocked every person in that room. 3 years ago, she'd graduated from Columbia Business School, top 5% of her class. She'd been recruited by Goldman Sachs as a junior analyst, specializing in risk assessment and fraud detection. Her supervisors called her exceptional. Her future seemed limitless. Then her mother had a stroke. Ruth Turner, 58 years old, the woman who'd raised Felicia alone after her father left, collapsed one night in their Harlem apartment. The stroke left her partially paralyzed, unable to work, requiring round-the-clock care. The doctors said rehabilitation would cost $15,000 a month. Felicia had no savings, no family wealth, no safety net. She faced an impossible choice: keep her career or save her mother. She chose her mother. Felicia quit Goldman Sachs. She sold everything she owned. She moved back to Harlem, into a tiny apartment with a hospital bed in the living room, and she became a caregiver. Within 6 months, her professional contacts stopped returning calls. Within a year, it was like she'd never existed. Wall Street doesn't wait for anyone, especially not a young black woman with a gap in her resume and no connections left. So Felicia became a waitress. First at a diner in the Bronx, then a steakhouse in Midtown. And finally, 2 years ago, she landed at the Meridian Club, the best tips in the city if you could stomach the clientele. She could stomach it. She'd learned to make herself invisible, to absorb insults without flinching, to smile while men like Garrett Whitmore treated her like furniture. But she never stopped learning. Every night after her mother fell asleep, Felicia would pull out her laptop. She'd read earnings reports, analyze SEC filings, study market movements. It was the only thing that made her feel like herself, like the woman she used to be, before everything fell apart. And she paid attention to the men at the Meridian Club, especially Garrett Whitmore. For 2 years, she'd served his table every Saturday. She'd heard him brag about deals. She'd listened to him advise his friends on investments. She'd watched him take phone calls about Nexus Technologies, his voice low and urgent. 6 months ago, she'd started keeping notes. 3 months ago, she'd noticed the patterns, the TV appearances, the stock jumps, the quiet sales. 2 months ago, she'd pulled Nexus's SEC filings and found what she was looking for, the footnotes that everyone else ignored. Felicia Turner knew exactly what Garrett Whitmore was doing. She'd just been waiting for the right moment. There was one other person in that restaurant who knew Felicia's secret. Harold Brennan sat alone at a corner table, nursing a cup of coffee. 72 years old, white hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like someone's grandfather. He was, in fact, one of the most respected financial minds in America. Harold had spent 30 years as a professor at NYU's Stern School of Business. He'd consulted for the Federal Reserve. He'd trained a generation of Wall Street leaders. Now retired, he came to the Meridian Club every Saturday for the quiet and for the conversations with a certain waitress who knew more about markets than most of his former students. Harold had recognized Felicia's brilliance months ago. He'd watched her explain complex financial instruments using salt shakers and napkins. He'd tested her with questions that would stump MBA candidates. She'd answered every one. He'd asked her once why she was working as a waitress. She'd just smiled and said, "Sometimes the best view of the game is from the sidelines." Harold didn't push, but he understood. This woman was waiting for something, and now, watching Garrett Whitmore humiliate her in front of the entire restaurant, Harold Brennan realized the wait was over. The laughter at Garrett's table faded slowly, like ripples dying on still water. Felicia hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. She just stood there, holding the champagne bottle, her face unreadable. Garrett loved that. The silence. The submission. It confirmed everything he believed about the natural order of the world. No? He leaned back, grinning. Nothing? Cat got your tongue? He spread his arms wide, playing to his audience. Come on, I'll make it easy. Simple question. Should I buy stocks or bonds right now? Surely even you can answer that. Felicia looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in 2 years. And then she spoke. Neither. Garrett blinked. Excuse me? You asked for my advice. Her voice was calm, steady. "You should sell." "Sell?" Garrett snorted. "Sell what?" "Nexus Technologies. All of it. Before Tuesday." The table went quiet. Garrett had just told millions of CNBC viewers to buy Nexus. He'd staked his reputation on it. And now a waitress, this waitress, was telling him to sell? For a moment, he was too stunned to respond. Then his face hardened. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Nexus's Q3 report shows revenue recognition irregularities," Felicia said, her tone shifting into something sharper, more precise. "Accounts receivable jumped 340%, while revenue only grew 12%. That's textbook channel stuffing. And the SEC filing from last month has a footnote about an ongoing internal review. That's code for investigation." Dead silence. The fund managers at the table exchanged glances. Caroline Hayes set down her fork. This wasn't waitress language. This was Wall Street language. Garrett's face reddened. "You're reading headlines and pretending to understand them." "I'm reading 10K filings," Felicia replied. "There's a difference. Something shifted in the air. The other diners had stopped their conversations. Staff members peered out from the kitchen. Everyone was watching now. Garrett stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "All right." His voice was tight, controlled. "You think you're so smart? Let's make this interesting." He pointed at the CNBC screen on the wall. Nexus's stock price glowed green, $142.50. "Nexus will close above 150 by Friday. If I'm right, you stand on that chair." He jabbed a finger at the seat behind her. "And apologize to everyone here for wasting our time. Publicly." His friends chuckled nervously. "But if you're right," Garrett smiled, knowing she couldn't be. "I'll write you a check for $100,000, donated to whatever charity you want. On camera. Deal?" The room held its breath. Felicia's co-worker Derek, watching from near the kitchen, whispered urgently, "Felicia, don't..." But Felicia wasn't looking at Derek. She was looking at Garrett Whitmore, this man who'd spent 2 years treating her like she was less than human, who thought his money made him untouchable, who had no idea that she'd been studying him like a specimen under glass. "Make it financial literacy programs," she said quietly, "for underserved communities, and you announce it yourself, on CNBC." Garrett's grin widened. "Done." They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. Everyone in that restaurant had just become a witness, and Felicia Turner, the invisible waitress, had just made the most dangerous bet of her life. Felicia walked into the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly. She leaned against the cold steel counter, closed her eyes, and let the sounds of the restaurant fade away. What had she just done? 2 years of silence, 2 years of swallowing insults, of being invisible, of waiting. And now, in 60 seconds, she'd thrown it all away on a public confrontation with one of the most powerful men in finance. But as her heart rate slowed, Felicia realized something. She didn't regret it. She couldn't. Because this moment had been building for far longer than 2 years. Her mind drifted backward to a different kitchen, a different time. She was 25 years old again, sitting in a glass-walled conference room at Goldman Sachs. 12 analysts around a mahogany table, the managing director presenting quarterly risk assessments, numbers flowing across screens like water. And then she saw it, a flaw in their correlation model that no one else had noticed. She raised her hand. Her voice shook slightly as she spoke. "Sir, the correlation assumptions don't account for tail risk in emerging markets. If we adjust for that, the exposure is actually 3 times higher than projected." The room went silent. 12 faces turned toward her. Some annoyed, some skeptical, some simply confused. The managing director stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at the screen. "She's right," he said finally. "Fix it." That was the moment Felicia knew she belonged. She was good at this. Really good. She could see patterns others missed, read footnotes others skipped, connect dots others didn't even know existed. For one beautiful year, she thought she'd made it. Then came the phone call, 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. She was still at her desk, buried in spreadsheets. "Felicia, this is Mount Sinai Hospital. Your mother has been admitted. She's had a stroke." The next hours were a blur. Fluorescent lights, antiseptic smell. Her mother's face, half paralyzed, her eyes full of fear. The doctor's words, clinical and devastating. "She'll need 24-hour care, rehabilitation, physical therapy, speech therapy. Without insurance, you're looking at $15,000 a month. Minimum." Felicia had $4,000 in savings, no family to call, no safety net. She sat beside her mother's bed that night, holding her hand, watching monitors beep. Ruth Turner had raised her alone, had worked double shifts as a hotel housekeeper to pay for Felicia's education, had never complained, never asked for anything, never stopped believing that her daughter would achieve great things. And now Ruth couldn't speak, could barely move, could only look at Felicia with eyes that said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Felicia made her choice before dawn. She resigned from Goldman Sachs that week, sold her apartment, moved back to Harlem, and she disappeared. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of feeding her mother, bathing her, doing physical therapy exercises in their tiny living room. 3 years of overnight shifts at diners, of rude customers and aching feet, and never enough sleep. 3 years of watching her former classmates get promoted, get married, get everything she'd once dreamed of. But Felicia never stopped studying. Every night, after Ruth fell asleep, she would open her laptop, read earnings reports, analyze markets. It was the only thing that kept her sane, the only connection to the person she used to be. And then she got the job at the Meridian Club. At first it was just about the money, better tips, wealthier clients, enough to cover her mother's medications. But then she started listening. The men at these tables talked openly, arrogantly, as if the servers didn't exist. They discussed insider deals, manipulation schemes, fraud. Garrett Whitmore was the worst of them. Felicia began keeping notes, recording patterns, pulling public filings and cross-referencing what she heard. 6 months ago, she'd realized what Garrett was doing with Nexus Technologies. 3 months ago, she'd found the evidence buried in SEC footnotes. 1 month ago, she'd made contact with a journalist named Sarah Wade from the New York Times. And today, Garrett Whitmore had handed her the opportunity she'd been waiting for. He'd asked her for financial advice, and she was finally going to give it to him. Felicia opened her eyes, pushed herself off the counter, and straightened her uniform. Her hands weren't trembling anymore. She walked back out onto the floor. Derek caught her arm as she passed the kitchen door. "Are you crazy?" he whispered. "That's Garrett Whitmore. He destroys people for fun. What are you doing?" Felicia gently removed his hand. "He asked for financial advice. I'm going to give it to him." "Felicia, cover my tables for 15 minutes. Please." Derek stared at her like he was seeing a stranger, but he nodded. Felicia reached into her apron and pulled out a small notebook, worn, dog-eared, filled with 2 years of observations. Then she pulled out several folded papers, printouts of SEC filings she'd downloaded that morning. She'd been carrying them for weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. Felicia walked across the restaurant floor, not toward Garrett's table to serve, toward Garrett's table to present. The conversations around her faded. Diners looked up from their Eggs Benedict. Staff members froze mid-pour. Garrett saw her coming and smirked. "Oh, look, the financial advisor returns." He gestured grandly to his associates. "Everyone, Pay attention. We're about to get educated. Scattered laughter. Felicia stopped at the edge of the table. She didn't smile, didn't flinch. When she spoke, her voice had changed. No longer the soft, deferential tone of a server. This was the voice she'd used in Goldman Sachs conference rooms. Mr. Whitmore, you asked for my advice. Let me give you a proper analysis. By all means. Garrett leaned back, arms crossed. Enlighten us, sweetheart. Felicia ignored the condescension. She'd heard worse, much worse. Nexus Technologies, she began. Ticker symbol NXT. Current market cap $8.2 billion. You've been publicly bullish since Q2. You've made 17 television appearances recommending the stock. Each appearance correlates with a 3 to 5% price increase. The smirk on Garrett's face flickered. Impressive memory, he said. You can count TV appearances. So what? Felicia unfolded one of her papers and placed it on the table. Page 43 of their most recent 10Q filing. Footnote 12. She pointed to a highlighted section. Quote, the company is cooperating with an informal SEC inquiry regarding revenue recognition practices. End quote. Caroline Hayes leaned forward, frowning. Wait, I didn't catch that in my analysis. Most people don't read footnotes, Felicia said. That's the point. Garrett's jaw tightened. One footnote doesn't mean anything. You're right, Felicia agreed. So let's look at 3 more things. She raised one finger. First, accounts receivable. Nexus reports that their accounts receivable grew 340% year over year, but their revenue only grew 12%. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. Do you know what that means? They're booking sales that haven't actually been paid for. It's called channel stuffing. They're shipping products to distributors who never ordered them, counting it as revenue, then taking the products back after the quarter ends. It's one of the oldest accounting tricks in the book. The fund managers at the table exchanged uneasy glances. Felicia raised a second finger. Second, insider selling. Nexus's CFO sold $12 million in stock last month through a 10b5-1 plan. These plans are supposed to be set up months in advance to avoid insider trading accusations. But his plan was filed just 46 days before the sale. The legal minimum is 45 days. She looked directly at Garrett. When a CFO sells that much stock that fast, it means one thing. He knows something bad is coming, and he's running for the exit. Caroline had pulled out her phone, frantically typing. Felicia raised a third finger. Third, the auditors. Peterson and Associates has been Nexus's external auditor for 11 years. Last quarter, they quietly resigned. No announcement, no explanation. Just gone. She let that sit for a moment. Auditors don't resign from $8 billion clients unless they've seen something they don't want their name attached to. Something like fraud. The table was silent. One of the fund managers, a man who'd been laughing loudest at Garrett's jokes, had gone pale. Holy shit, he muttered. I have 20 million in Nexus. Garrett's face had turned red. A vein pulsed in his temple. This is ridiculous, he snapped. She's a waitress. She's reading conspiracy theories off the internet and pretending to be an expert. Felicia looked at him calmly. Then why are you sweating, Mr. Whitmore? Something dangerous flashed in Garrett's eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by someone like her. You know nothing about real finance, he said, his voice low and hard. Nothing about how the world actually works. You carry plates for a living. And you carry other people's money, Felicia replied. The question is whether you're carrying it to safety or carrying it into a fire you started yourself. From the corner of the restaurant, Harold Brennan watched with quiet satisfaction. He'd always known Felicia was exceptional. Now everyone else was about to find out. Caroline stood up abruptly. I need to make a call. She walked toward the exit, phone already pressed to her ear. Other diners had stopped pretending not to watch. Whispers rippled through the room. Garrett, sensing he was losing control of the narrative, made a desperate move. "You know what? Let's settle this right now." He pointed at the CNBC screen. "Pull up Nexus. Let's see what the real experts say." Philip, the manager, hurried to increase the volume. On the screen, Nexus's stock price held steady, 142,050. Green, stable, normal. Garrett spread his arms triumphantly. "See? Nothing! You're full of—" He never finished the sentence. Garrett's confidence swelled. The stock was fine. The screen proved it. This waitress had just embarrassed herself in front of everyone who mattered. "As I was saying," he continued, louder now, playing to the room, "this is what happens when people who don't belong try to pretend they understand things beyond their station." He stood up, buttoning his jacket, preparing to deliver the killing blow. "Let me explain something about the real financial world, sweetheart." He gestured expansively. "I've made more money before breakfast than you'll make in your entire life. I've advised presidents. I've moved markets. I've built an empire." He stepped closer to Felicia, towering over her. "And you? You move plates. You refill water glasses. You exist to serve people like me. That's the natural order of things. That's how the world works. And no amount of Googling financial terms in your sad little apartment is going to change that." A few nervous chuckles from the room, but fewer than before. Something had shifted. Garrett didn't notice. "So here's my advice to you," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Go back to the kitchen, finish your shift, and never embarrass yourself like this again." Felicia didn't move. "Are you done?" she asked. Garrett blinked. "Excuse me?" "I asked if you're done, because I have a few more things to say." The room held its breath. "Where did you go to school?" Garrett demanded. "Community college? Online degree? Let me guess. You watched some YouTube videos about investing and now you think you're Warren Buffett." "Columbia," Felicia said quietly. "MBA, class of 2019, top 5%. Silence. "Bullshit," Garrett said. "Call them." Before Garrett could respond, a voice came from across the restaurant. "She's not lying." Harold Brennan rose slowly from his corner table. His presence immediately commanded attention. There was something about his bearing that signaled authority. "Who the hell are you?" Garrett snapped. "Harold Brennan, former chair of the finance department at NYU Stern. Consultant to the Federal Reserve from 2008 to 2015. He walked toward Garrett's table with measured steps. "I've trained hundreds of analysts in my career. I can count on one hand the number who truly understood markets at an intuitive level." He stopped beside Felicia. "She's one of them." Murmurs rippled through the restaurant. People recognized the name. Harold Brennan was legendary in financial circles. Garrett's face twisted. "I don't care if she has a PhD from Harvard. One degree doesn't mean she knows anything about my business." "You're right," Felicia said. "So let me tell you about your business specifically." She pulled out another sheet of paper. "You've appeared on CNBC 17 times in the past year to promote Nexus Technologies. Each appearance, the stock jumps. And each time, within 48 hours, Whitmore Capital sells shares." She held up the paper. "March 15th, CNBC appearance, stock jumps 4%. March 17th, Whitmore Capital sells 200,000 shares. April 3rd, another appearance, stock jumps 3%. April 5th, another 150,000 shares sold." She looked at him. "The pattern repeats 7 times. That's not analysis, Mr. Whitmore, that's pump and dump." Garrett's face went white. "Those are normal rebalancing transactions," he said quickly. "Standard portfolio management." "Rebalancing means buying and selling," Felicia replied. "You've only sold $52 million worth in 8 months, while telling everyone else to buy." Caroline had returned from her phone call. She stood frozen near the entrance, staring at Garrett with a new expression. Not discomfort anymore. Horror. "Is this true?" she asked. "Garrett, tell me this isn't true." "It's slander," Garrett snarled. "She's making it up. I'll sue her into oblivion." "For what?" Felicia asked. "Reading public SEC filings out loud?" Another diner, a man in his 60s who'd been listening intently, stood up. "I bought Nexus because of your recommendation," he said, his voice shaking. "I put my retirement savings into it. Are you telling me you were selling the whole time?" Garrett pointed at Felicia. "This woman is nobody. She's a waitress with a chip on her shoulder. You're going to believe her over me?" "I'm going to believe the SEC filings," the man said. He sat back down, pulling out his phone. The room was fracturing. Garrett could feel it. His allies retreating, his authority crumbling. He made one last attempt. "Even if any of this were true, which it isn't, it doesn't matter. By Friday, Nexus will be at 160. The stock is solid. The company is sound. And you," he jabbed a finger at Felicia, "will be standing on that chair, apologizing to everyone here." Felicia tilted her head slightly. "You're that confident?" "I don't lose. Ever." Felicia nodded slowly. "You know who else said that? Every person whose company you destroyed on the way up. The pension funds you raided. The small businesses you bankrupted. They all thought they wouldn't lose either." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "Business is war. The weak lose. That's not my fault." "No," Felicia agreed. "But what happens next will be." Garrett opened his mouth to respond, and then every phone in the restaurant buzzed at once. The fund manager at Garrett's table looked down at his screen. His face went gray. "Oh my God," he whispered. All eyes turned to the CNBC screen on the wall. A red banner had appeared at the bottom. "Breaking. SEC announces formal investigation into Nexus Technologies. Trading halted." The anchor's voice filled the silent room. "In a stunning development, the Securities and Exchange Commission has announced a formal investigation into Nexus Technologies for suspected accounting fraud and securities violations." The stock price on screen was frozen, $142.50. But everyone knew, everyone understood, that when trading resumed, Nexus wouldn't be worth half that. Maybe not even a quarter. Felicia Turner looked at Garrett Whitmore. "Still confident?" she asked. For a moment, nobody moved. The CNBC anchor kept talking, but her words seemed to come from very far away. Numbers scrolled across the screen. Expert analysts appeared in small boxes, looking grave. None of it mattered. Everyone in the restaurant understood exactly what had just happened. The waitress had been right. The fund manager at Garrett's table, the one who'd laughed loudest at his jokes, who'd put $20 million into Nexus, stood up so quickly his chair crashed backward. "I'm ruined," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm completely ruined. I put everything into Nexus because you told me to." Garrett's mouth opened, but no words came out. This is a coincidence," he finally managed. "The timing, is it a coincidence?" Felicia asked. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "I told you to sell before Tuesday. Today is Saturday. You had 3 days. You chose to bet against me instead." Caroline Hayes walked toward the table, her phone still in her hand. Her face was pale, her expression hard. "I just called my office," she said. "We're pulling every cent from Whitmore Capital, effective immediately. This is a disaster, Garrett." "Caroline, wait. Don't." She held up her hand. "Just don't." Garrett reached toward her, but she stepped back as if he were contagious. The phones hadn't stopped buzzing. All around the restaurant, wealthy diners were calling their brokers, their lawyers, their financial advisors. Voices overlapped in a rising tide of panic. "Sell everything! How much exposure do we have? Get me out of Nexus now!" A woman stood up, her face flushed with anger. I bought 200,000 shares last month. You said it would double. My clients trusted your recommendation, another man shouted. They trusted you. Garrett spun in a slow circle, watching his world collapse. The people who'd laughed at his jokes 5 minutes ago wouldn't meet his eyes. The associates who'd flattered him for years were already distancing themselves. Bradley, the senator's aide, was speaking urgently into his phone. The senator needs to issue a statement immediately. Complete distance from Whitmore. No, he never endorsed any investments. Yes, I understand. The senator's wife had vanished entirely. In the middle of the chaos, Felicia Turner stood perfectly still. Derek had emerged from the kitchen. He was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. She called it, someone said, loud enough for the room to hear. The waitress called it, to the minute. Who is she? Another voice demanded. Harold Brennan had returned to his seat. He watched Felicia with quiet pride, the student he'd never officially taught, proving everything he'd suspected about her. Who are you? The question came from multiple directions now. How did you know? Felicia looked around the room at all these rich, powerful people who'd ignored her for 2 years, or worse, humiliated her. I'm someone who reads the footnotes, she said. Then she turned back to Garrett Whitmore, who stood frozen at the center of his collapsing universe. Our bet, she said simply. Nexus won't be above 150 by Friday. You owe $100,000 to financial literacy programs. Garrett's face twisted with rage. This isn't over, he hissed. Felicia almost smiled. No, she agreed. It isn't. Garrett Whitmore was a survivor. He'd built his career on ruthlessness, on finding angles, on never admitting weakness. Even now, with his investment thesis crumbling on live television, his mind was racing through escape routes. Deny everything, blame the SEC, call his lawyers, threaten to sue. He straightened his tie and forced his face into an expression of contempt. So, you got lucky with one prediction, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Markets are volatile. This means nothing. By next week, Nexus will recover, and you'll be a footnote in a story nobody remembers. He threw a handful of bills on the table. We're leaving. Philip. He snapped his fingers at the manager. Get my car. He turned toward the exit. We had a bet, Mr. Whitmore. Felicia's voice stopped him. Nexus won't be above 150 by Friday. It won't be above 50 by Friday. You owe $100,000 to financial literacy programs. Garrett didn't turn around. Sue me. He took another step. I won't have to, Felicia said. The SEC will do much worse. Garrett froze. When he turned back, something had changed in Felicia's face. The calm professionalism was gone. In its place was something colder, harder. You know what's interesting, Mr. Whitmore? In all your years of destroying companies and ruining lives, you never bothered to learn the names of the people you hurt. They were just numbers to you, collateral damage. Garrett frowned. What are you talking about? Morrison Medical Supply. Small pharmaceutical distributor in New Jersey. You executed a hostile takeover in 2018, loaded it with debt, extracted $40 million in management fees, then let it collapse. 150 employees lost their jobs. Their pensions were wiped out. Garrett's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something like recognition. Then it was gone. I've done hundreds of deals. I don't remember every... The CEO fought you in court, lost everything, died of a heart attack 6 months later at 54 years old. His name was Thomas Morrison. Felicia's voice hadn't risen. If anything, it had gotten quieter. He was my mother's brother, my uncle. The room went completely silent. And my mother, Ruth Turner, was his business partner. She invested her life savings in Morrison Medical, every penny she'd earned in 30 years of cleaning hotel rooms. When you bankrupted the company, you bankrupted her. Felicia took a step toward Garrett. She had a stroke 6 months after my uncle died. The doctor said it was stress-induced. She lost the ability to walk, the ability to work, almost lost the ability to speak. Another step. I quit my job at Goldman Sachs to take care of her. I gave up everything. My career, my savings, my future. Because of what you did. And for 3 years, I've been serving you Eggs Benedict every Saturday while you talked about your deals 3 feet away from me. She was close to him now, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. You never once looked at me long enough to wonder who I might be. Garrett's face had gone the color of old paper. That's just business. I didn't know. That's the point. Felicia's voice was steady as stone. You never know. You never care. To you, we're just numbers, just collateral damage, just people who don't matter. She looked around the room, at all the wealthy faces watching in stunned silence. But those numbers have names. Those names have families. And sometimes, those families remember. Caroline Hayes had her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wet. My God, she whispered. Garrett, you destroyed her family. Garrett's mouth opened and closed. For the first time in perhaps his entire life, he had nothing to say. Felicia stepped back. You asked me for financial advice, Mr. Whitmore. You wanted me to teach you about money. She smiled, and there was no warmth in it at all. Lesson 1. Everything has a price, even arrogance. Garrett's survival instincts finally kicked in. This is entrapment. His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through. You set me up. This whole thing, the bet, the questions, it's a setup. I'll have you arrested. For what? A voice asked from across the room. Answering your question? A woman stood up from a corner table, 40s, sharp suit, press credentials visible around her neck. Sarah Wade, New York Times. I've been investigating Whitmore Capital for 18 months. Garrett's face went slack. Felicia has been one of my sources, Sarah continued, walking toward the center of the room. She reached out a year ago with evidence of potential securities fraud. Everything she mentioned today, the pump and dump scheme, the insider selling, the accounting irregularities, I've verified independently through my own investigation. She pulled out her phone and held it up. And the SEC investigation that just broke? My story runs Monday morning. Front page. This conversation just gave me my opening paragraph. The room erupted in murmurs. Garrett pointed a shaking finger at Felicia. You planned this. All of it. Felicia met his gaze calmly. You planned to defraud millions of investors. I planned to stop you. We all have our goals. 2 years, Garrett sputtered. You worked here for 2 years just to listen, to learn, to gather evidence. Felicia nodded. You talked about your schemes 3 feet away from me every Saturday. You never noticed because you never see people like me. We're invisible to you. She paused. That was your mistake. Garrett's associates had already begun to scatter. The fund managers were gone. The tech CEO had slipped out during the commotion. Bradley, the senator's aide, was heading for the door, phone pressed to his ear, already crafting talking points to protect his boss. Sir, Bradley said without looking back, the senator will be issuing a statement. He barely knows you. He's never endorsed any investment advice. Please don't contact his office. The door closed behind him. Garrett stood alone. The man who'd commanded this room 5 minutes ago, who'd humiliated a waitress for sport, who'd thought himself untouchable, now abandoned by everyone who'd laughed at his jokes. Caroline Hayes approached him slowly. I believed in you, she said quietly. I defended you when people said you were ruthless. I thought you were just aggressive, competitive. She shook her head. But this? Destroying a family and then mocking their daughter while she served you champagne? That's not business, Garrett. That's evil. She walked away without waiting for a response. Garrett's face contorted, the mask of confidence finally cracking. "You can't do this to me," he said, his voice rising. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am?" "Yes," Felicia said simply. "You're a man who just lost everything in a restaurant, while a waitress watched." She turned and began walking toward the door. "Oh, and Mr. Whitmore?" She paused, looking back over her shoulder. "I'd skip the Eggs Benedict next week. I don't think you'll be welcome here anymore." She untied her apron as she walked, folding it neatly, placing it on an empty table. Derek caught up with her near the entrance. "Felicia." He was looking at her like she was a stranger. "Who are you?" She smiled, a real smile this time, tired but genuine. "I'm someone who finally finished her mother's business." Harold Brennan met her at the door. He took her hand in both of his. "Your uncle would be proud," he said. "So would your mother." Felicia's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "Not yet. I need to go see her. Tell her it's done." She walked out into the Manhattan sunlight, leaving Garrett Whitmore standing alone in the wreckage of his empire. The invisible waitress had become visible at last. That evening, the video appeared online. Someone in the restaurant had recorded everything: the humiliation, the analysis, the revelation, the collapse. Within 3 hours, it had 5 million views. Within 12 hours, 50 million. The hashtag started organically, Waitress vs. Billionaire. Then came others, Had Justice for Morrison, Felicia Turner. Read the footnotes. By Sunday night, Felicia's face was on every news channel in America. The headlines wrote themselves, "Waitress destroys billionaire with his own SEC filings. The server who predicted the Nexus crash, to his face. Garrett Whitmore exposed, how a Harlem woman took down Wall Street's biggest fraud." Monday morning, Sarah Wade's article dropped. Front page of the New York Times, "The Waitress, the Billionaire, and the Fraud, inside Whitmore Capital's House of Cards." The story detailed everything: the pump and dump scheme, the insider trading, the pattern of destruction stretching back decades. Morrison Medical Supply was just one of dozens of companies Garrett had gutted. Thousands of jobs lost, billions in pension funds evaporated, lives ruined by a man who'd never suffered a single consequence. Until now. When the markets opened Monday, Nexus Technologies resumed trading at $31 per share, a 78% collapse. Investors who'd trusted Garrett's advice lost everything. Whitmore Capital faced $2.3 billion in redemption requests within 48 hours. Clients fled. Partners resigned. The SEC subpoenaed records going back 15 years. By Tuesday evening, Garrett Whitmore III was arrested at his Hamptons estate. The charges: securities fraud, wire fraud, market manipulation. His mugshot appeared on every network. The man who'd worn $15,000 suits and waved $100 bills at waitresses now wore an orange jumpsuit and a number. Bail was set at $50 million, the same amount he'd bragged about to Felicia. 2 weeks later, a class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of Morrison Medical Supply victims and every investor who'd lost money following Garrett's fraudulent recommendations. 200 plaintiffs initially, then 500. Then over 1,000. The settlement came faster than anyone expected: $52 million to affected employees and families. Garrett's personal assets were seized, his properties auctioned, his empire dismantled piece by piece. Felicia testified at the preliminary hearing. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Several jurors were crying. At a press conference afterward, a reporter asked her, "What message would you send to other corporate predators?" Felicia thought for a moment. "There's always someone watching," she said, "and sometimes she's the one pouring your water." The clip went viral. Another 50 million views. The offers came flooding in after that. Goldman Sachs called first. They wanted to discuss her return to the industry. A senior analyst position, corner office, salary negotiable. Morgan Stanley followed, then J.P. Morgan, then CNBC, offering her a regular contributor spot. Netflix wanted to option her life rights for a limited series. Felicia declined them all. Instead, she used her share of the settlement, plus the speaking fees and interview payments that kept arriving, to open the Morrison Financial Literacy Center in Newark, New Jersey. Free classes, free resources, financial education for people who'd been told their whole lives that money was too complicated for them to understand. The grand opening drew 200 people, local press, state representatives, Caroline Hayes, who'd become one of the center's largest donors after leaving Whitmore Capital. "You changed my perspective in that restaurant," Caroline told Felicia. "Let me help you change others." Harold Brennan became the center's volunteer advisor. At 72, he finally felt like he was teaching students who truly needed him. But the moment that mattered most to Felicia happened quietly, with no cameras present. She visited her mother in their Harlem apartment the evening after Garrett's arrest. Ruth was sitting up in bed watching the news coverage, tears streaming down her face. "They're saying, 'You're a hero,'" Ruth said slowly. Her speech had improved with therapy, but every word still required effort. Felicia sat beside her and took her hand. "I'm not a hero, Mom. Hero. I'm just someone who loved her family enough to learn how to fight." Ruth squeezed her daughter's fingers. "Tommy, your uncle, he always said—" "I know," Felicia's voice caught. "He said men like Whitmore never face consequences, that they're too big to fail." She pulled out a photograph from her bag. Thomas Morrison on the day Morrison Medical Supply opened, surrounded by smiling employees, full of hope for the future. She placed it on her mother's bedside table. "He was wrong, Mom. We made him wrong." Ruth smiled through her tears. The first real smile Felicia had seen in 3 years. "He can rest now," Felicia whispered. "And so can you." 6 months later, the Morrison Financial Literacy Center won national recognition for its impact on underserved communities. The waiting list for classes stretched into the hundreds. One afternoon, a young woman approached Felicia after a workshop. 19 years old, nervous, holding a sleeping baby. "Ms. Turner? I'm a single mom. I work 2 jobs. I never understood any of this money stuff. Everyone always made me feel stupid for asking questions." She hesitated. "Can you really teach someone like me?" Felicia smiled. "Someone like you is exactly who this is for. What's your name?" "Destiny." "Okay, Destiny. First lesson." Felicia leaned in. "Never let anyone tell you that money is too complicated for you to understand. That's a lie that rich people tell to keep you from asking questions. And asking questions is how you fight back." Destiny's eyes lit up. "Now," Felicia said, "let's start with the basics." There's one more scene to this story. 6 months after his conviction, Garrett Whitmore sat alone in a federal prison cell. 15 years, the judge had said. No parole. A guard dropped a package on his bed, a padded envelope, already opened and inspected. Inside was a copy of the Wall Street Journal. The headline on the front page, "Morrison Financial Literacy Center wins national recognition." Beneath the newspaper was a handwritten note on plain white paper. 2 words. "Still teaching. F." Garrett stared at it for a long time. Then he lay back on his thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, alone with the silence and the weight of everything he'd lost. He'd asked a waitress for financial advice to mock her. He should have listened. Because sometimes, the smartest person in the room is the one you never bothered to see. And sometimes, the people you dismiss as invisible are the ones who see everything. If Felicia's story moved you, subscribe for more stories of underdogs who refused to stay invisible. Hit that notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, your circumstances don't define your intelligence. Your uniform doesn't tell your story, and the person serving your coffee might just be the one who changes the world. Never underestimate anyone. You never know who's watching, you never know who's waiting, and you never know who's ready to rise.